Well, I guess I'm doing 3 videos this month just so I can show you 2 random little indie games. This time, it's Automaton Heart, a sequel to Automaton Lung, which I'll also have to explain, won't I? It's this weird 3DS game that released after the eShop closer had been announced. It's short and sweet. Short enough I was able to do a quick, though not 100%, playthrough in preparation to play the sequel and make this video, just to remind myself. To put it simply, it's surreal and minimalist. I'm not sure there's any text anywhere except for like the title and like a few numbers to show collectible counts and floor numbers in the elevator. You just wake up next to some sort of a stasis pod with no guidance. You learn the controls by pressing buttons and seeing what happens. You find these spinning panels, apparently computer chips, that you collect and that slowly raise your maximum health. You're not told they raise your maximum health, you just eventually notice that your health bar has gotten bigger. And then you find there's an elevator and you can explore different floors of this structure you're in, find more chips and more weird sights, strange boss fights, mysterious, massive architecture, and strange connections of highly liminal spaces. And then you find you can step outside the tower and explore further. Or maybe you find this first and you only explore the tower itself later. As a nice touch, the floor of the tower you start on contains both a door to the elevator and a door to the top of the tower from which you can access the overworld. Either way, whether you leave the tower from the top or the bottom, you can find a strange ship and then fly it around to explore several abandoned city-like areas. Eventually, you get enough chips to fight the final boss, maybe get the super weapon for the fight if you go for 100%, and then you get an ending cutscene. It's just this strange journey with an emphasis on exploration. If I had to classify it, I'd probably say it's a 3D platformer in the Collectathon vein. While you can still buy the game on Steam, unfortunately isn't quite the same. I'm actually a big proponent of hardware gimmicks, but this to me is their biggest downside. They create experiences that you just can't recreate unless you're playing on original hardware. The surreal minimalism of the game worked great with the 3DS's 3D. It's one of the rare games that I primarily play with the 3D effect on. Even where the game has some rough edges, it ends up adding to the strange, dreamlike feel rather than detracting from it. The fact it eschews things like a pause menu just adds to it not really feeling like a normal video game. I'd say it's worth playing even if you can't play it as it was originally released. But then we have Automaton Heart, which takes a very interesting direction, outright advertising itself as an action RPG, which is strange, right? The first game barely had upgrades, just the chips to increase your hit points and a couple of weapons you could find, and the game often very deliberately avoided traditionally gamey elements like menus. So trying to mix in RPG elements, when RPGs are games where you tend to pay a lot of attention to the systems, is definitely an interesting choice, quite at odds with the original's design. The first thing the game hits you with, immediately breaking a lot of expectations set by the first game, is an opening narration, and it's very cryptic and surreal, though there are some familiar sights here if you played the first game. And then I ran into technical issues. Probably won't affect you. It seemed to be OBS causing issues with the game when I tried to record it, so probably won't affect you. But that is why the footage may be a bit weird and low res at parts. Then after navigating a trippy and somewhat clunky tutorial, the game gives you a choice: the path of light or the path of dark. But you're given the information that one is incomplete without the other. It looks like they'll open a door, but at the end of either path you find a button that acts as a character select. Do you want to wake up in a crypt as the death automaton Uma, or wake up in the tower as the life automaton Alma? I chose Uma, who seems to be the protagonist of the first game, and a little bit of lore is that apparently the weird final boss of the first game was her killing God. Neat. Before long, though, there is a tease of a character swapping gimmick. You can swap back to Misha, the character in the tutorial area, or once you meet your counterpart, you can swap to them. And then you start to explore. Compared to the first game, the world is a lot larger and more open, but with improvements to mobility such as the better handling on the hoverboard, it isn't too daunting. Maybe some of the areas are a bit barren, but it works for the abandoned, surreal vibe the first game already had, and leaves room for the sort of strange abandoned megastructures that were some of the most fascinating things in the first game. But you really do not have much guidance, just to seek out your counterpart. While I feel like comparisons to Dark Souls has become a meme because it's been overdone by people either looking to just invoke a popular game or unfamiliar with anything that influenced Dark Souls, look, sometimes a Dark Souls comparison is warranted because Dark Souls, specifically the first one, is one of the only other games I can think of with this sort of structure. You're just dropped into the world, and after the tutorial area, you have only a vague goal to go on and a strange and mysterious world in front of you. One of the particularly special parts of Dark Souls 1 was, for me, not knowing what'd be around the next corner. And that feeling of exploration and wonder is increasingly hard to get out of games as I get older and games become more standardized. Fortunately, Automaton Heart at least is anything but standard. After meeting your counterpart, you're sent to gather 7 soul cores from certain locations that are merely hinted at, and this is, I don't think it's as good as collecting the chips was in the first game. Chips in this game are just items you can consume for EXP or sell for money. When they were the main collectible, there was usually something to find wherever you explored. But with the cores, most of the searching you do ends up feeling like you hit a dead end. So maybe that's a misstep in a game so focused on exploration. Despite this though, the world itself is fascinating to explore and strange in a way that makes seeing what's around that next corner kind of its own reward. It's only in some of the more tedious and repetitive sections that the game starts to drag and be more reliant on mechanical rewards. Sadly, while the world is great to explore, there are some mechanical missteps. For instance, death is pretty brutal. You respawn at the last bonfire, but all of your items drop where you die. Die to a boss? Fuck you, now your stuff's getting camped. Die in water too deep to swim down and back up without dying? Yeah, that stuff's gone. Or if you die because you reflexively jumped down the only pit in the game that kills you, yeah, all that shit you'd stockpiled is gone for good. It's a bit mean. Though if the game did slightly less to encourage hoarding, especially chips which grant you more EXP as you level up, I could maybe see this working. Then the 2-character thing really feels like it could have been something really cool, but kind of wound up being more a cool concept than a cool execution. They each have their own level, upgrades, and inventory, and you can switch between them at the buildings that house most of this game's bonfires. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if the game is complex enough in its systems for the two to diverge meaningfully. They get different powers they can use, but these wound up being a system I barely used, too limited and often situational, and they're learned slowly as you level up, and thus they're the kind of thing I never really got in the habit of even thinking of using, even later on where I had more of them and maybe they could have been useful. But there's not really enough mechanics for like builds or something, so I mostly ended up using it sort of like a light fast travel between 2 points. Something like this would be really cool in a game that had like actual builds and stuff. But sadly, the organ system, one of the weird things the game sells itself on, is kind of just a quirky skin over a fairly standard set of systems without a lot of depth. There's no like swapping your organs for different ones or weird shit like that. They're just upgrade categories that share their name with stats. As upgrades, mind is accuracy and navigation, heart is hit points, lungs are speed and stamina, and gut is defense and hunger. While as stats, mind is MP, heart is a pool you use to regen health, lungs are stamina for your boosters, and gut is a hunger meter. Only the latter two stats actually are helped by their respective upgrades. And there's really not enough here for you to like craft builds with. There's only a couple tiers of upgrades for each organ, so I mean you have a little bit of playstyle customization, but it's a pretty basic RPG system like you would see in pretty much any game. Like, not enough to even really call it an RPG. So I do feel a little bit bad that a lot of the game's ambition didn't quite work out. The scale of the world is great, but with only 7 places that actually matter, it does limit the joy of exploring somewhat. And it doesn't help that the most enjoyable areas to explore were, in my experience, the crypt, the area surrounding the crypt, and the tower. So, the starting areas. The attempts at RPG systems didn't really lead to much, though at least they're not as intrusive as RPG systems can be in some games. I'm looking at you, weapon upgrade system in Control. I love that game, but my god, why do you have those RPG systems? But they don't add a lot, and it's not really worth it for, like, taking you out of it. There are systems that make you think in concrete ways, which goes against the strangeness that made the first game so surprisingly gripping. So I think the game would have been better with either deeper systems or fewer systems. Both Automaton Lung and Automaton Heart are weirdly easy to recommend. Do you look at this footage and want to just wander around it for a while, not caring about the specifics? If yes, play it. If no, maybe not. Unfortunately for Automaton Heart, which tries to be more mechanically oriented, it runs out of new mechanical things to show you fairly early on. At least in my experience. I mean, maybe I could just be bad at finding things. And with the focus on just collecting the soul cores and not the chips, scouring every corner of the map doesn't feel as interesting as it did in Automaton Lung, while stumbling into the right location can feel like an almost random source of one of the game's 7 key items. So while Automaton Heart wasn't everything I dreamed it'd be, I don't know, I still had fun with it. Like, yeah, it wasn't quite what I'd hoped it'd be, and maybe it overstayed its welcome a little, but I still found it weird and captivating. Maybe it just needed a little more time in the oven. No game is untouched by the finite nature of time. If there is a third game, I'll still be on board. A little more refinement and development, and I think the ideas that Automaton Heart brought to the table will be something really special. What we have now still ain't bad for only $15. Let me know what you think of this weird game, and let me know if you've played it and like, I just missed something really, really important. But for now, this is Mikhail, signing off.